The patrol route ended at mid-slope in October of 1977. It did not continue to the Upper Fork. A district schedule map from that year still shows the segment clearly marked, inked by hand, across the southern interior grid of Olympic National Forest. The object was routine: paper, pencil, coordinates aligned to known terrain. At waypoint 4, a handheld compass registered a 12-degree deviation from its established reference. The reading was taken 3 times. On return, both instruments tested within normal range. The Upper Fork was listed for rescheduling. It was never scheduled again. Coordinates removed the following winter. Olympic National Forest sits in the northwestern corner of Washington State, occupying the interior of the Olympic Peninsula, a landmass largely defined by what surrounds it. The Pacific Ocean to the west, Hood Canal to the east, the Strait of Juan de Fuca along the north. These waters don't just frame the peninsula, they effectively contain it. Road access is limited to a single highway loop skirting the perimeter. No road crosses the interior. That distinction, no interior crossing, sets the Olympic Peninsula apart from nearly every comparable federal wilderness unit in the contiguous United States. The terrain rises sharply from coastal margins into the Olympic Mountains, with several peaks exceeding 7,000 feet. Glaciers persist on the higher elevations year-round. Below the snow line, the western slopes receive among the highest annual precipitation recorded anywhere in the lower 48 states, some stations logging over 14 feet of rainfall per year. That moisture feeds the temperate rainforest systems concentrated in the major river valleys: the Hoh, the Queets, the Quinoles. Canopy closure in these corridors is dense enough to reduce ground-level light even at midday. Undergrowth fills in aggressively. Trails require regular maintenance to remain passable. Without it, vegetation reclaims cleared ground within a single growing season. The drainage systems feeding these valleys branch extensively through the interior highlands. Some tributaries are named on federal survey maps. Others appear only as unmarked blue lines, seasonal or intermittent flows that don't warrant designation at standard cartographic scale. In practical terms, this means portions of the forest watershed have never been formally inventoried at ground level. Patrol administration for the National Forest, distinct from the adjacent national park, fell under the Olympic National Forest District offices, with coverage parceled out across ranger districts by terrain sector. During the late 1970s, route planning relied on hand-drafted schedule maps, updated seasonally and retained in district files. Those files are what eventually drew attention to the drainage in question. A district route schedule from the spring of 1977 lists standard coverage across the southern interior sectors. The entry is dated April 14, 1977. Sector coverage confirmed for Graves Creek tributary system, lower approach, and mid-slope. Conditions moderate. Crossing at marker 7, passable on foot. No equipment staging required. A follow-up notation, undated but filed beneath the April entry, reads, "Mid-slope approach extended to Upper Fork. Deadfall present above the second crossing. Passage slow but unobstructed. No anomalies reported. Asterisk. The tone is procedural throughout. These are check-ins, not reports of consequence. The drainage was simply part of a rotation, one among several dozen segments covered on a rolling schedule. A second entry from the same filing period, dated July 9, 1977, records a return visit. Upper Fork inspection completed. Water levels lower than April reading. Trail markers intact through third waypoint. Estimated coverage time consistent with prior visits. Nothing to note. By contrast, a schedule notation from October of the same year carries a slightly different character. The entry is dated October 3, 1977. Graves Creek Upper Fork, approached from Lower Trail Junction. Visibility reduced by fog, approximately 200 feet horizontal. Continued to mid-slope marker. Equipment reading at waypoint 4 registered inconsistent with prior baseline. Handheld transit showed deviation not attributable to slope correction. Asterisk. The notation continues on a second line, separated from the first. Asterisk returned to lower junction. Did not complete Upper Fork segment. Will reschedule. The rescheduled visit does not appear in subsequent filings. What does appear beginning with the winter schedule drafted in late 1977 and continuing without interruption through every seasonal plan filed thereafter, is the absence of that drainage from listed coverage, not removed by formal amendment, not flagged with a closure notation. The coordinates simply stop appearing. The route charts from 1978 onward reflect coverage of the surrounding sectors in normal detail. Adjacent drainages maintain their inspection cycles. Only the upper fork of this particular tributary system drops from the record. A 1979 district planning memo, a general administrative document not specific to this sector, references patrol optimization across southern interior routes. The language is broad. Efficiency reviews, it notes, had resulted in adjustments to several low-priority coverage areas. No individual segments are named. Whether that memo accounts for the deletion is not clear. The framing would fit. It would also fit a dozen other routing changes made around the same period for reasons fully documented elsewhere. For this drainage, no corresponding documentation has surfaced. The 1980 schedule map, the 1981 schedule map, and those through the remainder of the decade all reflect the same gap. The surrounding terrain continues to appear in district records, timber surveys, hydrological assessments, fire risk classifications. References to the immediate drainage do not. Whatever the operational rationale, it was not committed to paper in any form that has since been located. The absence is not dramatic on its face. Patrol routes shift. Priorities change. Federal land management in this period was subject to budget pressures, staffing constraints, and competing administrative demands that routinely reshaped field coverage without generating elaborate explanations. What distinguishes this case is the consistency. A single omission might suggest an oversight, a misfiling, a season skipped for reasons no longer legible. An omission replicated across 8 consecutive years of scheduling documentation, across multiple district staff cycles, across at least 2 different map drafters, suggests something closer to an established practice. Established practices, even informal ones, tend to have origins. The origin here sits somewhere in that narrow window. After July of 1977, when coverage was still being logged without apparent issue, and before the winter schedule was drafted, when it quietly stopped. The October 1977 notation wasn't the last piece of field documentation tied to the Graves Creek Upper Fork. One additional record surfaces from the same calendar year, filed not with the routine schedule entries, but in a separate subfolder within the district's administrative correspondence binder. The document is dated November 18, 1977, addendum to October Sector Review. Upper Fork approach revisited on November 12th by 2-person team. Low light conditions at entry point, approximately 0840 hours. Compass bearing, confirmed at lower junction, reading standard. Bearing at mid-slope marker showed 12-degree variance from established reference. Variance persisted through 3 separate readings, taken at intervals. Team did not advance beyond mid-slope. A line follows, handwritten rather than typed. Instruments checked against known baseline on return. Both units reading correctly within 1 degree. The typed portion resumes beneath it. Recommend deferral of Upper Fork. Coverage pending equipment review and seasonal reassessment. No equipment review appears in subsequent filings. No seasonal reassessment is scheduled. The word deferral implies a return that never materializes in any document that has since been cataloged. What makes this addendum notable isn't the compass variance itself. Magnetic anomalies occur throughout the Pacific Northwest. Volcanic substrata, mineral concentrations, localized geological formations all produce measurable deviations. A 12-degree variance in a heavily folded interior drainage is not, by itself, unusual enough to warrant documentation. What's notable is that someone chose to document it anyway. Field teams operating in this period did not typically record instrument readings unless those readings affected navigation decisions or raised safety considerations. The fact that both compasses were verified functional on return, and that the variance appeared only within a specific segment of the route, apparently warranted enough attention to generate a written addendum outside the standard schedule format. The The team turned back at mid-slope. That detail appears in two separate filings now. The October entry that reads, "Did not complete upper fork segment," and this November addendum confirming a second incomplete approach. After November 18th, 1977, the upper fork does not appear in any field documentation, not as a completed patrol, not as a deferred one. The scheduling gap that begins in the winter charts simply absorbs whatever remained unresolved, and the record moves forward without it. Considered in isolation, each element of this case fits comfortably within known categories of administrative and environmental explanation. Patrol route adjustments in the late 1970s were common across national forest districts throughout the Pacific Northwest. Federal land management agencies were operating under budget constraints that had accumulated through the mid-decade period, and field coverage was frequently recalibrated to concentrate resources on high-use corridors and areas with active management priorities. A low-traffic interior drainage with no developed infrastructure, no permitted recreational use, and no active timber or hydrological study would have been a reasonable candidate for reduced coverage, with or without a formal closure designation. The absence of paperwork is also less anomalous than it might initially appear. District-level administrative records from this period were inconsistently retained. Reorganizations, staff turnover, and the transition between filing systems all contributed to gaps that have nothing to do with the content of the missing material. Researchers working with National Forest archives from the 1970s regularly encounter incomplete runs, years missing entirely, or categories of documentation present for some districts and absent for others. The compass variance has a plausible framework as well. The Olympic Peninsula's geological profile includes significant igneous intrusions and mineralized zones concentrated in the interior ranges. Localized magnetic anomalies have been documented in comparable terrain throughout the Cascades and the Coast Ranges. A 12-degree deviation, while notable, falls within the range of readings attributed to subsurface mineral concentrations in peer-reviewed geophysical surveys of the region. Human perception also plays a documented role in how field teams respond to unfamiliar conditions. Reduced visibility, unusual instrument behavior, and physical discomfort from cold or wet conditions can collectively shift decision-making toward caution in ways that don't always generate explanatory paperwork. A team that turned back twice in deteriorating autumn conditions may have done so for reasons that felt self-evident at the time, reasons that didn't seem to require formal justification. Time compounds all of this. 45 years of distance between an event and its examination tends to introduce interpretive weight that the original participants likely didn't assign. A routing decision that was entirely routine in 1977 acquires the appearance of deliberate concealment simply because the paper trail around it happens to be thin. None of these explanations are implausible. Several of them, taken together, may fully account for what the record shows. One detail resists that framework. The 1979 District Planning Memo, the one referencing patrol optimization and adjustments to low-priority coverage areas, was drafted 18 months after the Graves Creek Upper Fork dropped from the schedule. If the drainage had been deprioritized through a normal administrative review, the expected sequence would have been review conducted, decision made, schedule adjusted, memo filed summarizing the changes. That sequence is visible elsewhere in the same filing period for other route modifications. The documentation trail is intact for those adjustments. For this drainage, the schedule changed first. The memo that might explain it came nearly 2 years later, in language too broad to confirm any specific connection. That sequencing isn't impossible. Administrative decisions often precede their formal documentation. A field-level judgment made informally in late 1977 could have been absorbed into a broader efficiency review the following year, without requiring its own paper trail. But it does mean that the only document which could plausibly explain the omission postdates the omission by a significant margin, names no specific locations, and may have no connection to this drainage at all. The gap between what the record implies and what it confirms stays open. The last physical object in this chain is the 1977 schedule map itself, a hand-drafted document showing coverage sectors across the southern interior, with the Graves Creek Upper Fork marked in the routing grid alongside its neighboring drainages. By the 1978 version of that same map, The coordinates are gone, not crossed out, not annotated, simply absent, the way a name disappears from a list when whoever maintained the list decided, for whatever reason, to stop including it. Maps of this kind weren't meant to carry meaning beyond their operational function. They were working documents, tools for field coordination, not archival statements. The people who drafted them were scheduling patrols, not constructing a record for future examination. And yet, here is the record, examined. Whatever occurred in that drainage during the autumn of 1977, whether a practical decision, an unresolved instrument anomaly, or some combination of factors that seemed manageable at the time, it left a shape in the documentation, not a presence, an outline where coverage used to be. The district files have been reviewed, the scheduling maps have been compared, the addendum has been located and read. This file is considered complete for the purposes of this review. But the archive remains open. If the history of these forests interests you, consider following this channel. More documentation of this kind surfaces more often than you might expect.